He was a 52-year-old alcoholic when he had his awakening and followed his teacher and changed his life and changed the life of so many people. Finding a Diamond on a Muddy Road. From 101 Zen Stories by Nyogen Senzaki. Gudo was the emperor's teacher of his time. Nevertheless, he used to travel alone as a wandering mendicant. Once he was on his way to Edo, the cultural and political center of the Tokugawa shogunate. He approached a little village named Takanaka. It was evening and heavy rain was falling. Gudo was thoroughly wet. His straw sandals were in pieces. At a farmhouse near the village, he noticed 4 or 5 pairs of sandals in the window and decided to buy some dry ones. The woman who offered him the sandals, seeing how wet he was, invited him to remain for the night at her home. Gudo accepted, thanking her. He entered and recited a sutra before the family shrine. He then was introduced to the woman's mother and her children. Observing that the entire family was depressed, Gudo asked what was wrong. "My husband is a drunkard and a gambler," the housewife told him. "When he happens to win, he drinks and becomes abusive. When he loses, he borrows money from others. Sometimes he becomes thoroughly drunk. He doesn't come home at all. What can I do?" Gudo said, "I will help him. Here's some money. Get me a gallon of fine wine and something good to eat. Then you may retire. I'll meditate before the shrine." When the man of the house returned about midnight, quite drunk, he bellowed, "Hey, wife, I'm home. Have you something for me to eat?" "I have something for you," said Gudo. "I happened to get caught in the rain, and your wife kindly asked me to remain here for the night. In return, I bought some wine and fish, so you might as well have them." The man was delighted. He drank the wine at once and laid himself down on the floor. Gudo sat in meditation beside him. In the morning, when the husband awoke, he'd forgotten about the previous night. "Who are you?" "Oh, my head, where did you come from?" he asked Gudo, who was still meditating. "I'm Gudo of Kyoto, and I'm going on to Edo," replied the Zen master. The man was utterly ashamed. He apologized profusely to the teacher of his emperor. Gudo smiled. "Everything in this life is impermanent," he explained. "Life is very brief. If you keep on drinking, gambling, you'll have no time left to accomplish anything else, and you'll cause your family to suffer greatly." The perception of the husband awoke as if from a dream. "You're right," he declared. "How can I ever repay you for this wonderful teaching? Let me see you off and carry your things a little way." "If you wish," Gudo assented. The two started out. As they'd gone 3 miles, Gudo told him to return. "Just another 5 miles, he begged Gudo. They continued on. "You may return now," suggested Gudo. "Another 10 miles, the man replied. "Return now," said Gudo. When the 10 miles had been passed, "I am going to follow you all the rest of my life," declared the man. Thank you all, everyone, for being here at Holy Days Sesshin. I think we all feel that gratitude together for everyone who's come here. Amazing, variation and stories of how people have come here this week. And we have people just beginning Kese who haven't even met the other Kese students necessarily. And we have someone who's just started practicing Zen Buddhism and meditation not long ago who's right on it. We have lovely surprise of Dylan joining us for Sesshin, and all the other many stories of where we come from as travelers coming together. So this story comes from this little collection, often sold this way, called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, 101 stories. And Nyogen Senzaki, who was the honorary founder of this monastery, began his work on these stories quite a while. He worked on them in the 20th century. And he worked with the man known as Saladin Paul Reps, and they published those stories. So this was kind of standard around in the 70s and 80s, you know. You'd find this in people's homes and probably bathrooms, in a little book, and really delightful collection of stories, and they seemed just kind of delightful. And then what Nyogen Senzaki said, we have a manuscript, an early draft of his working on this, and he said it was called 101 Zen Stories to Read 101 Times. The characters in this story, they're from our lineage. We chant them in our Teidai Denpo lineage every day in the monastery. And the teacher was Gudo Toshuku. He lived from 1577 to 1661. He served 3 times as abbot of Myoshinji, one of the 2 main Rinzai temples in Kyoto. Among his leading disciples was Shido Bonan, and that is the other person in our story, who was the teacher of Dokyo Etan, who was the teacher of Hakuin Nikkaku. So, to some people, these names don't mean too much, but to us, they're kind of important. We just commemorated the death of Rinzai, and maybe some folks who are new have read a little bit about Rinzai, and this school of Zen is called Rinzai Zen. Rinzai lived in the 7th century in China, and the school continues to this day. So the other person we've just mentioned, who most everyone is familiar with, is Hakuin. And Hakuin lived in the 18th century, and he was kind of a revolutionary character. He was a Renaissance man, and he really did a lot to alter, to clean up, and to pick it up and set it straight, Rinzai Zen again. And each of these people actually in this lineage, Gudo was a reformer as well. Shido Munan or Bunan, it's the same name, were well known for their reformation of what had become Rinzai Zen in Japan. They lived during this period of time when there really was a lot of change, and there had been a lot of civil war, a really horrible civil war during that time, and then became this time when there was a lot more stability. But in the Rinzai tradition and in Zen Buddhism, it kind of reflected what was going on in society, of a lot of hierarchy. Things became very rigid and somewhat shallow. So all of these folks were really known as reformers, and a lot happened during the Tokugawa period in terms of kind of creating the Zen that we know today with lay followers and with an emphasis on Zen. So Gudo Toshuku served as abbot of Myoshinji 3 times, and he left no writings, actually, very little, and there's just a few written, recorded sayings of his. But he really appears to be quite a remarkable, sharp teacher from this story, certainly. If you also think about the fact that he was a reformer during a time when things were still very almost corrupt, religiously corrupt, very political. In the koan system, apparently people even sold answers to koan, and there were very formulated answers to koans. And so there was it was very political. During that era, there was a great emphasis on literature, writing, artistic. And if you think about that time period, really all around the earth on that time, very few people were literate. Most people could not even read and write. So these were the echelon, these were the top people in the hierarchy, one of the top people. I mean, you had, the emperor, obviously, and the rulers, and then the clergy. There were all these layers, really, the daimyo, the shoguns, you had the clergy, and then you came down into the more common people. And interestingly, during this time, trade began to evolve, and the merchant class was rising, but they were not thought of as a very good class, but they ended up having power and money. It was a very interesting time in history. So Gudo Toshuku really was able to navigate dealing with a corrupt hierarchical system and to reform at the same time, and to find these diamonds on a muddy road. So we'll talk a little more about the other character in the road. So Gudo Toshuku's successor, known as Shido Bunan in our lineage, and also known as Munan, because the character can be pronounced, I guess, both ways. He was born into the Miwa family, and his name given at birth was Osakabe, one of those, Taro. So he was born into a family of innkeepers, so kind of like the merchant class in the province not far from Edo. Edo was a former name of Tokyo. So Edo at that time was growing, and really it was going to become, within 100 years, the largest city in the world. So there was a lot of trade, evolution, and change during that time. Shido Monan, as a child, was very talented and was known, they had money, he had some education, and he was known as the kana writing boy. So he created poetry, waka, written in kana, and kana is a form of writing that is purely Japanese. There's no Chinese characters, and it spells out the syllables, and it's something very homegrown in a way. And if you've seen what's called grass writing, it's really very beautiful. And so he was a very talented boy and did those things. So the reality of this story might be a little bit different than what I read and what's in the book here, because there are several accounts of this story. And in a way, this is a story, but there's various versions. And it seems that Shido Bonan actually knew Gudo Toshuku for quite a while and knew him as a young man and trained with him, actually. So it wasn't just a farmhouse, but it really was an inn. So it was an inn on this famous highway. What's referred to in the title as a muddy road. And the highway ran from, we call it a highway, it was a road, from Kyoto to Edo, or Tokyo, of 400 odd miles. And this was one of 3 routes that you could get to, and it's the one along the sea. So, so this route actually was in good shape for roads at that time, but nonetheless, I'm sure when it was raining, this was a muddy road. Probably there was, people either walked, they rode in palanquins, they rode with someone else carrying them, literally, like 2 people or 4 people carrying them, or there were horses as well. So there was probably, things to run into on the road like horse poop and everything else. Now here this guy is, Gudo Toshuku, and he is the teacher of the emperor, actually the retired emperor. This guy is up in the hierarchy of the Rinzai school. So here he is traveling along the road, walking like a mendicant. And he's wearing straw sandals made out of rice straw. And, somebody of that, I'm sure there was enough money that he could have been just riding fine, you know what I mean, when he's going to visit the emperor. But he chose to walk. He chose to walk and to take this highway. The Tokaido route to Edo, to Tokyo, would have been filled with all kinds of people. It's very well traveled. So you would have had wealthy people, you would have had merchants, you would have had farmers, I don't know what farmers, laborers certainly, all kinds of people. So here was this, one of the highest priests in the whole country. And he was walking in his straw sandals, looking like a laborer, essentially. It's a long road. It must take at least, 2 weeks, 20 days. I mean, if you think about it, it's got to be, 25 miles a day, something like this. So he probably had visited this inn before, and it probably was familiar to him. And this has been accounted in some more modern translations that, yeah, he was familiar, and it had been a long time since he was there. And this man had been his former student, Shido Manan, and he eventually had to leave his studies, his Zen studies, and go back and take care of his family responsibilities to help run the inn. These posts or stations along the road were really important. And it's probable that the place that his family owned was significant, and quite a few important people stopped there. So he'd lost touch with his Zen studies. He'd lost touch with Gudo, and certainly picked up sake and gambling, apparently. So chances are, it sounds like it wasn't very good for him. It sounds like he was pretty much in the thick of it when it comes to drinking sake. So there are many countries in the world where it's common to drink daily, frequently. People have to often learn how to drink so they don't have too many problems. But some people, it seems, and modern science bears out that some people have kind of a natural allergy, a genetic predisposition to having trouble with alcohol. It sounds like maybe this was Shido Bonan's issue. It wouldn't have been the first clergy to have this problem. So, what would happen, right? You become abusive, you become addicted, and you can't really find your way out of that, if that's your problem. So here was this wonderful human being who was very talented. Obviously, from what I've read, Gudo, really took a liking to him, and he was a special kind of human being. But he got into the thick of it, and deep into the mud, and had a hard time getting out. So in this story, Gudo Toshuku is concerned about the family, and he's concerned about the innkeeper. And the woman asks him for help. Now, if they really had a relationship in the past, maybe somebody would be inclined to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk and say, what's going on with your life, man? Let's straighten this out. You're abusive to your family. You're not taking care of your responsibilities. I know you. I know that you're capable of so much more. Of course, he couldn't do too much, he couldn't say too much when the man came home drunk, because I don't know if you've ever had that experience of trying to rationalize with somebody who's 3 sheets in the wind, but you don't get very far, right? So he took the skillful way out, not way out, but the skillful way, and he didn't avoid the situation either, right? He could have been kind of disgusted and said, you know, I don't know if I want to deal with this. And maybe he passed by the inn several times. But this time, his straw sandals were in pieces and there were sandals in the window. The conditions were right. So he stopped. He gave the woman, the wife, some money and asked to provide some fine wine and some fine food. And Shidobunan came in and said, oh, this is lovely, you know. That's kind of unusual, an unusual approach. But here was Gudo Toshuku really being very generous. And it can be sometimes one of the most generous things to do, to simply provide what someone wants, to make them comfortable. In the morning, I'm sure maybe Shidobunan realized, oh my God, you know, who knows, he might have been in a blackout the night before, right? Realized, my gosh, this is Gudo Toshuku. How could I embarrass myself? Humiliated. And Gudo Toshuku said, well, I do have to be off. And, but by the way, life is very brief. And if you continue with this, boy, it's not a good scene, right? So I think it's really interesting that no matter how ashamed Shidobunan was, and no matter how disgusting he was, I mean, the truth is, you drink all the time, you come home after a night of partying, you don't smell too pretty. You know, chances are there's other things going on. You may get sick, right? Something like this. Not the prettiest scene. So he must have been terribly embarrassed. And instead of, he did apologize profusely, but instead of defending himself or showing pity, you know, self-pity, right? There's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's lots of wonderful sayings, and one of them is, pour me another. So he wasn't playing that card either, you know. And what he did was he took action. He helped his teacher. He carried his things, walked with him, and Gudo said, well, you know, thank you. You've been very kind, but that's really enough. Turned him away. Oh, just a little bit more. Whether he had it in his mind or not to leave at that point, to leave home, we don't know. But he simply took action, the appropriate action. It was a tremendously humble thing to do. He didn't go out and get drunk. He didn't make a credible amount of excuses. He simply put one foot in front of the other on the road. So this business of leaving home. Shido Bonan didn't get attached to his the ways that he could have reacted, the way he felt. He simply kept with him. So how does this, stinking drunk get to be the grandfather of Hakuin? He became a very, very highly regarded leader in our lineage. Hakuin was thought very, very highly of Shido Bonan. He became a teacher who was very straightforward, very simple, and who was most concerned with his students finding their true selves, their true self within. This was his mission. He had many lay students, and he despised the hierarchy of Rinzai Zen priests. He wasn't the first. Basically, he thought they were evil, but there was an earlier quote I found from Ikkyo. Many of you know Ikkyo. He said, "Whether it's a man, a dog, a fart, or a turd, he's ready to cajole them, selling koans and then calling it transmission." So very bitter criticism. And Shido Bonan felt the same way. He said, the clergy is the worst sort of evil there is. They are thieves who get by without having to work. So he was not in love with the idea that it's about wearing the robes. And he said that even though a man leaves home and lives simply with his 3 robes and a bowl on a rock under a tree, he still cannot be called a true Buddhist priest. Yet if he does wish earnestly to become a true priest, he will realize that he has many desires and is possessed of a body which is endowed with 84,000 evils, of which the cardinal 5 are sexual desire, cupidity, birth and death, jealousy, and desire for fame. These evils are the way of the world. They are by no means easy to overcome. Day and night, by means of enlightenment, awakening, you should set yourself to eliminating them one after another, thus purifying yourself. So he had very strong views about this matter. In the midst of this religious, background of somewhat stagnant and corrupt political ways, Shido Bonan, as I said, was really interested in teaching everyone, not just those who were well-to-do and clergy. So he had at one point been preaching to an audience composed of both wealthy people and low-ranking people. And this seemed to be very expressive of his teaching, was that he simply clapped his hands and said, "There is no difference in your hearing the sound. Only a contrived difference when you remember the distinctions. There's no difference in hearing the sound." So very often, Shido Bonan seemed to distill things to simple means. He's also quoted as saying, "There's no special doctrine for the study of Zen." Sounds familiar, right? "All that is needed is to see it directly, hear it directly. In direct seeing, there's no seeing. In direct hearing, there's no hearing." Well, this might be familiar with what we've been doing for the last few days. So in the midst of this fancy jargon that was floating around of pomp and classism. He spoke directly to the experience of each person, regardless of who they were. We sit on the cushion, and when we can minimize, eliminate, cut through, or just drop, not be interested in all of the stories that run through our heads, and simply directly hear the sound. That experience, that getting muddy on the road, simply being present, is how Shido Bunan was able to understand his true identity, how he was able to transform. Because there was nothing out there to get, to attain. His name is very interesting. Shido Bunan, the name comes from actually the Faith in Mind poem by the third patriarch, Sosan Kanchi Zenji. And we often recite that the first day of session when we do the Diamond Sutra. But since we had Buddha's birthday, we didn't do that. So Gudo Toshoku named Shido Bunan for the first words, the first line of that poem, Faith in Mind. And the characters, we usually translate this as the great way. The great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. Something like this. There's several translations, of course. And his name, Shido Bunan, are the first characters in that poem. So Shido being, it's translated as the great way, but Do is way. But she is more like utmost, you could say, the utmost way. And Munan is without, Mu is no, and Nan here is the difficulty, complications. And so the great way is not difficult. So Shido Bunan was named for this, written by the third ancestor. So there was Bodhidharma, and who else after Bodhidharma? Ekataiso, and then Sosan Kanchi. So there is a famous story about Sosan Kanchi, who says to his teacher Ekataiso, he was desperate in his desire to get it, right? He said, I am riddled with sickness. Please absolve me of my sin. And I imagine that's the way Shido Bunan felt, right? Drunken in front of this great teacher that he loved. I'm riddled with sickness. Please absolve me of my sin. Eka said, bring your sin here, bring it on, and I will absolve it. And so Sanganji looked into that, and he said, finally, when I look for my sin, I cannot find it. I can't identify it. I can't find it. I know I have this sin. I know I'm sick. I know I'm disgusting. But it wasn't something that he could identify. I can't find it. Ekataiso responded to him, I have absolved you. You should live by the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So this name was pretty profound for Shirobonan. There's a lot of similarities. So Sankanchi didn't become the student of Eka Taiso until he was in his 40s, late in life. And so there's really something about this sickness. And we kind of tend to think, well, people who are active alcoholics, like they're those people, right? The Shirobonan, like this. How did he ever get to be a teacher? I mean, this guy's a mess. And not really one of us. And I won't go into why we might think that. But this feeling of sickness, this feeling of sin, I think we can relate to that. How I'm not going to be good enough, and I'm not good enough. Yeah, it's a wonderful idea, isn't it? Buddha nature, it's right here, a song of Zazen, what else are we but Buddha? Great idea, I'm sure. But to really get from A to B, right? To get from Kyoto to Tokyo, it's a long walk, isn't it? A muddy road. But you got to show up. Not riding in the palanquin and having somebody else carry your weight. We got to show up ourselves. Our sandals are going to get ripped up. We're going to get mud and horse shit between our toes. There's just no getting around it. We're going to have to deal with it. The fact that we are inebriated with our delusion. We're addicted to it. And we're going to need to find a different way than a lot of the coping mechanisms we try to employ on a regular basis. Another drink won't help. Another deluded thought won't help. But we do get stuck in this stuff all the time. We get stuck in the mire and the mud. So how do we transform this sickness? We had to have some Rinzai today, since we're honoring Rinzai's memorial today and honoring his teaching. And Rinzai talks a lot about the solution. He does it in kind of a berating way, it sounds like. But I think it's really out of a desperate caring. He often kind of scolds his students, right? And even calls them names we've heard before. And Rinzai says, he talks about that the need for true insight. So what is the insight that we need? Finding out who we really are and finding the peace within that. And he talks about, all I want to point out to you is that you must not be deluded by others. And being deluded by others is our interpretation of others, or those others up in our head, right? If you want to act, just act. Don't ever be intimidated. You students nowadays don't get it. What's the disease? What is this disease that you have? You don't get it. It's a lack of self-confidence. If your faith is insufficient, you'll keep on wandering in confusion. No matter what the circumstances, you will be controlled and led around by others. You will not find freedom. And it seems like what Shidobanan was pointing out is that this way, the way or the road, the great way to freedom is in just seeing, just hearing, and letting go. It makes me think of, there is another quote that he's really famous for, and some people may be familiar with it. It was through D.T. Suzuki that everyone in the West became familiar with that. It's basically translated as, die while alive and be completely dead. Then do whatever you will, all is good. So this business of dying completely. Well, it might be what Rinzai is talking about with Buji. This just seeing, just hearing, not controlling, not deciding, simply taking action in our being and showing up in this muddy road, one footstep after the other. There's no difference and no distinction in the hearing. I also found something lovely. Hakuin discovered in his later years that the hermitage, the temple that Shidobanan occupied in his later years was empty and for sale. And he remembered actually going to his teacher, Dokyo Etan, and studying with him there. And he at that point had enough money and privilege and asked Tori Angie to renovate and renew the Shido-an hermitage. I mean, here was a man who did not have a huge following. He was not a political beast. He didn't have a lot of money. But he was honored as the grandfather of the greatest reformer in Rinzai Zen. He was a 52-year-old alcoholic when he had his awakening and followed his teacher and changed his life and changed the life of so many people. So I feel very privileged to have been able to learn about this and to learn about our ancestors in this way. And thank you for your patience and time, and hopefully you got a couple winks of sleep in between. Maybe I don't. This is day 5. We haven't had session here in a few months. Most of us haven't had a week-long session in quite a while. Some people in quite a while, and it is refreshing, and it's a great challenge, but it's such a special time to be together. Thank you very much.